welcome to the Kankakee County Area Football Podcast. Mason, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing pretty great, Soucie. I mean, I'm here talking football with you. What else could make it better?
Looks like it's going to be a pretty interesting week for Kankakee area football teams. We've got, some pretty pivotal matchups, and let's start with the one I think both of us have been waiting for a while, because we think that it probably is going to be pretty defining about how good this team really is. Bradley Bourbonnais making that trip up to Lincoln Way Central. I mean, obviously a pivotal game in terms of just kind of getting the scope of how good this Bradley team is. What do you think is going to be the big key for the Boilermakers?
Well, first of all, this is a Bradley Bourbonnais team that lost to Lincoln Way Central twice last year, both in the regular season in a game that ended up deciding what was last year the Southwest Valley Green, and is now the Red this year. And then also in the Class 7A quarterfinals. The Boilers, this is going to be really their first big test, I would say. Crete Monee early in the season, they passed that one with flying colors. But now, last year Lincoln Way Central was able to just dominate them on the ground. Big chunk plays on the ground, eating up clock. Luke Tingley being out is really going to kind of hamper what the Knights are going to want to do against the Boilers. I think this Boiler defensive line, which was sensational again against Stagg last week, going to be a really big key. That their defensive line, front seven, being able to keep that Lincoln Way Central run game at bay. Sounds like from reading what you were previewing that Justin Cobbs has come in for Tingley and been a really great replacement for him. So the Boilers remember how they lost this game last year and know that they'll have to buckle down on the run and kind of, match that physicality that the Knights bring up front.
Yeah, you mentioned Justin Cobbs. I mean, he was part of a nice 1-2 punch when they had Luke Tingley, but obviously that injury has sidelined Tingley for the entire season. So kind of a one-man show with Cobbs in the backfield. But the one thing that I think Lincoln Way Central has done very well over the last couple of years and continues to do into this season is they really like that, moderate passing game that is, high percentage, and run the ball as much as you possibly can. Try to put together those 6, 7, 8-minute drives that just kind of frustrate you and annoy you more so than, and then end up, trying to punch in for some points. Usually have some good special teams play there too as well. Maybe not quite the strongest kicker that they had last year, but still a guy who can put away 3 if that's what the situation has to be. So fundamentally for Bradley, I think that's a big key for them. Like you mentioned a little bit there, is just making sure that they don't have those time-consuming drives that can just be irritating. Maybe they don't lead to points, but I mean they're just irritating because you get them in third down situations and they just keep moving the chains.
Right.
Yeah. So for this, I mean, obviously we talked about how important this is, playoff standing, whatever. In terms of that, still trying to keep their eyes on a potential conference championship game. This is the first of 2 big games that I think Bradley has over the back end of the course of the season. Still have Lincoln Way West down the road, but I feel like Bradley has to be going into this game with a lot of confidence that they can take this game even though it's on the road.
Oh, I think they can beat anybody in the state. And I mean, the way that they've played for a lot of this season for 18, 19 quarters, rightfully so. I think that this one, it's one that I wish I myself was going to be at. I think it's one of the best games around in the state this week, and a real tough road test for the Boilers. And I think aside from like what it would mean for the conference picture and whatnot, I think getting a win for Bradley in this moment would be a really big, like, all right, we've taken that next step kind of victory that they're really looking for this year to kind of take that next leap in the program. They've had 3 years ago, they made the playoffs. 2 years ago, they got to the second round. Last year, they got to the quarterfinals. They want to keep going further, and wins like this kind of help the confidence with that.
When you look at the overall landscape of what's going on here, something that's kind of been underlying and I know that they're kind of aware of it, but I wondered if there's been any conversations of it. It really looks like Bradley is going to be 6A for the postseason. They have never been a 6A team. Is that something that you've had any conversations with them about at this point? I know they're aware of it. Do they have any thoughts on, like where we're going to be heading in 3 or 4 weeks?
The one time when I read your first preview or your first playoff prediction of the season and saw that, and I shot Bradley Bourbonnais coach Mike Cole a text, and he just laughed and said, "Great, East St. Louis, LOL." But they've been in Class 7A for how long? They've had conference games with ways for how long? I think that hey, let us know who we got to play, and we're going to show up and play. Whatever class that's in, whoever it's against. And actually, if you go way back, about 15 years ago, they did play East St. Louis in a 7A first round game. And almost won that game. It was a 50-43 crazy one. The year East St. Louis ended up forfeiting their postseason success, anyways. I was actually a senior in high school that year, to really make myself feel old. But I mean, yeah, they're wherever they fit in. Hey, send us there. Let us know who we're playing, and we'll show up. This group is down for whatever, I think.
I specifically remember that game in particular because technology had not advanced to the point of where it has now. And I remember getting text updates when you had to type in the things letter by letter. You didn't have the full keyboard. You had to do the punch in. And I remember just seeing that someone was trying to text me score updates, and remember being impatient because it was taking forever as I was watching the little dots go. So that's how long ago that was. But that was a fascinating game. I remember it was just like a ping pong match. It just seemed like it was going back and forth. And Bradley's had a lot of those in the postseason where they played games like that. So definitely an interesting situation to think about for them in the construct. Not only for East St. Louis, it's just maybe a little bit of a different flavor in the postseason than they've been accustomed to in the past. So that should be fun. Moving on to Kankakee, I think we've talked about this quite a bit in terms of their schedule, in terms of them not really being pressed all that much in Southland Conference play. Where is their mentality right now? I guess basically trying to keep the eye on the prize because, I mean, they're not being pushed by these games. I mean, they won comfortably last week, maybe not as many points, but it seemed like they were never threatened last week, even for a minute. So they appear to have another one of those games this week when they go up to Rich Township.
Well, first of all, you mentioned the Boilers maybe sneaking in 6A. That's where Kankakee's resided the last few years. I think that the K's would love if they stayed in 6A this year and that they could maybe get a chance at a meeting with Bradley Bourbonnais in the 6A playoffs. I think that would be their ultimate preference. But yeah, looking at last week, I was a little surprised too at that 31 points. I thought that would be a little higher, especially after they set that school record of 82 against Thornton Ridge a few weeks ago. But they're just content with letting their defense do its thing. As good as the defense has been as of late, and as it's been for the last kind of handful of years, this was their first shutout of the season last week. Offensively, they're just kind of taking what they can get right now. And on the surface, the Rich Township game is kind of fascinating. I kind of thought coming into the year that the Raptors would be that team in the Southland that could maybe give Kankakee and Crete-Monee that push that those two teams have been looking for in the conference for a little while. And now they've won 3 in a row, their first 3 conference games. Some similar opponents as the K's with some scores that aren't quite as lopsided as the K's have had. But like you said, I think you get to this part of the season for the K's and it's like, all right, what do we do until we play Crete-Monee? They got through those non-conference games. That win against Normal, I think we're going to look back. That win at Normal is going to be huge for their season. Um, I think they just want to stay healthy and kind of keep that competitive edge by the time they get to week 9 and be ready to try and make a run at things in the postseason.
Yeah, you mentioned a little bit in that early statement, Kankakee kind of thinking that maybe 6A Bradley Bourbonnais would be a possibility as maybe a potential matchup. Unfortunately for the K's, if that's what they wanted, it looks like they're skewing towards 5A. So,
right.
So it's basically one of those situations where I don't think that's going to be in the cards. But like you said, it would have been interesting because those that don't know, there's kind of an underlying rivalry between those two schools that has not been able to. That hasn't been. Yeah, the fruition of that game is something that's of great debate. I know both of us are advocates for that game being put back on the schedule in some capacity. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. But they have not played since I believe 2016, and it was a series that at the time Bradley was dominating. But the tables have kind of turned in terms of football around here. Not that Bradley isn't still really good, but Kankakee's program has improved immensely over that time. I'd really like to see that rivalry.
So it was 18 was the last time that game has been played. It was my second year here at the Journal. The K's. So is Bradley. Both these are. I have covered extensively the last few years. This has been arguably the best, and the only other time that it's close up for debate is the late 80s. Of when both of these programs have been this good. Last year was the first year that they ever both won a playoff game in the same year. It's a real shame that game doesn't happen anymore. Like you said, I think the K's are wanting that to come back. And if that were to come back in the playoffs, that would, I think, be their biggest ideal desired outcome. But hopefully someday that game comes back. But yeah, like you said, it sounds like they're not gonna quite make the same playoff class this year. Although we're getting there, we're getting kind of close. So,
yep. So yeah, just interesting development there. Okay, the final city school in the equation. Little Saturday afternoon matinee game for the second time this year for Bishop McNamara. Marion Central Catholic coming down and to Kankakee for that one. This was. A couple of years ago, this was also a Saturday afternoon matinee, and at the time, Marion Central Catholic had one of the best players in the state, in Christian Bettenker, and things did not go well for the Irish on that afternoon. Bettenker had a field day. I'm sure the Irish are hoping to, not necessarily avenge that loss. It's been a couple years, but have things go a little bit better for them this time around.
Yeah, I was thinking about that game, and man, I forget the young man's name that played quarterback for Marion Central team, but he could sling it too, and he was fighting not only Ben, but all of his other receivers. And that was a huge running clock win for the Hurricanes. Obviously, a very, very different McNamara team, a different Marion Central team, for that matter too. But now it's the Hurricanes who are coming in here off of a huge win over Chicago Christian. That we saw the Irish have a couple weeks ago. But, man, kudos to McNamara for that win that they earned last week to stay undefeated at 5-0. Kind of got that monkey off their back in terms of snapping their playoff drought. Pretty much all, and now with the necessary 5 wins. A great conference win for them in terms of the Chicagoland Christian Conference picture. And now they come home. Like you said, these two teams played on a Saturday afternoon down here 2 years ago, and it went all Hurricanes. I think that this one might be a little closer on the scoreboard, but I think can go the other way, and the Irish have a great chance to get to 6-0 right before their biggest 2-game stretch of the season, probably Hope Academy and Wheaton St. Francis coming up in weeks 7 and 8. I believe those are both on the road, right? I think.
Yes, I believe that's right. Yeah. Yep. That would be the situation. So, but yeah, an interesting stretch for you misspoke there. Wheaton Academy and Hope are the next 2 games. Yep. But I just wanted to get that out there because I didn't want to cross-reference, Mac used to be in the Catholic League. They're not anymore. So Wheaton St. Francis would be a Catholic League game. No problem. But yeah, so
it was a pretty good one between those two teams in the last couple of versions. They had Coach Janani's last season. They pretty much needed that game and scored a huge upset.
Yep.
But yeah, those two put together a couple really good ones when I first started here.
Absolutely. Totally agreed. So they've had an interesting series when they did run together. So, all right, well, we've wrapped up City football. We're going to take a quick break here to get a word from our sponsors, and then we'll come back and talk a little Vermilion Valley football and as well as some Illinois Central 8.
I'm State Representative Steve Reich. Since 2017, I've led the fight to reform our child welfare system and supported educational choice for every kid in Illinois. I've worked to stop the collapse of our public pensions while standing up for businesses that are being crushed by crippling mandates. And I've never forgotten who pays the bill. The work isn't finished, and as I run for re-election, I'm asking for your support. I'm Steve Reich, and I approve this message.
SGKR Injury Attorneys tackles the toughest cases. I'm Matt Rundio. When life throws a flag, we go on offense to protect your rights. Don't get sidelined. Score a touchdown with SGKR. Visit us at sgkr.law.
At Oliver's, we are proud to serve our community. We serve up great customer service, quality products, ease of shopping, and we serve up delicious barbecued sandwiches at our fundraiser cookouts. So stop by Oliver's, 748 North Brenton and Dixon, and help fund our local clubs and events.
In Illinois and into Iowa, the story of Shaw Media is a story of trust. Since 1851, we've been informing, connecting, and reflecting the communities we serve, large and small, rural and urban, suburban, and river towns alike, with dozens of local newspapers, radio stations, magazines, and specialty brands like Friday Night Drive and Starve Rock Country. We meet people wherever they are. We shine a light on local government. We celebrate Friday night touchdowns. We tell the stories that shape your day, from neighborhood heroes to the Chicago Bears. But what truly sets us apart? It's our people. The award-winning journalists, broadcasters, and storytellers who live here, work here, and care deeply about what matters most to you. We don't just report the news. We're part of the fabric of the places we serve, from the Mississippi to the Illinois, from the Fox all the way to the chain of lakes. Trusted for generations, still earning it every day. Shaw Media, your most trusted local source.
Welcome back to the Kankakee Area Football Podcast. We're going to break down a little bit in the Vermilion Valley to start here. Obviously, let's start with the big one. I mean, a pair of 5-0 teams, Clifton Central traveling down to Westville. This is one that I think both of us earmarked really early on as probably the game of the year in this conference. Central goes in feeling pretty good about themselves. It's hard to deny that Westville probably feels pretty confident about where they're at as well. A huge win for them last week in terms of how many points they put up. They are clearly playing really, really good football right now. The game is at Westville. It's one of those things. I was thinking about it the other day, and I was like, I remember seeing a Clifton Central Westville playoff game at one point in time where Clifton Central is a substantial underdog against a very good Westville team. They almost pulled off a win down there, and I was like, how long ago was that? And I'm like, I went and looked it up out of curiosity. It was 2006. I'm like, I started to feel really old when that happened because I was like, geez, that was where my memory was on that one. And I was like, but I mean, these two over the, since the Vermilion Valley has kind of become a closed conference, these two have kind of been like, maybe a step behind Bismarck Henning. Both of these two teams have clearly demonstrated at this point they're probably a step ahead of Bismarck Henning this year. So it's these two. I think this is the conference champion that comes out of this game.
Without a doubt. I will help us both feel a little bit older here, though. That 2006 game, none of the kids on the field this week were even alive for that game. So that kind of helps us feel old. But yeah, I mean, so the Comets scored 67 last week in their rivalry game with Watseka, and Westville, I believe, leading the state in scoring at a shade over 60 points per game. So my question for you, what is the electrical situation like down in Westville? Is that scoreboard going to have enough power to stay operating on Friday? Because I mean, this game's going to be a first to 50 type of game, I think. And it's anyone's guess as to who's going to get to that 51st. I mean, there's so much offensive firepower that obviously both teams have been stout defensively in most of their games, like you said, in the locked VVC. So it's all opponent familiarity. We all have played the same teams for years. And yeah, these two, they had a great one last year. I believe it was a 1-touchdown game, or it might have been 2 years. It was decided right at the very end. But man, you look Westville. They lost their first 3 regular season games to start last year by 2 points, by 1 point, and by 1 point. And since then, they rattled off 6 regular season wins to end the year last year. They won their first 5 this year. Guy Goodlove's been doing it for a really long time down there, and he's done a really good job. This is, like you said, game of the week, game of the season, really in the VVC. And I like the Comets to be able to go on the road. I think that they've shown last week getting their run game finally started clicking together a bit to match how good that passing game's been. And I think that that's huge for them going into Westville, that their offense is going to be multidimensional and going to be able to kind of go stride for stride, punch for punch with Westville.
Yeah, it should be a really interesting game. It was just kind of one of those situations, even all the way back in the preseason, people were talking about, this being the 2 teams to look out for in this conference. So kind of a collision course game, and it has proven to be that because like I just mentioned a little while ago, Bismarck-Henning has usually been the class of the conference. They seem to have slipped back just a little bit here. But these 2 are definitely going to be the ones to watch in this situation. And I think it's really interesting now. You kind of look at this game and you look at where these 2 teams are going to be in the postseason. And I've talked to some people about Clifton Central about this as well. They want to try to get themselves in the best possible postseason position because they realize, even though they're going to be a 1A playoff team, they realize how deep 1A North could potentially be. And they want to put themselves at the highest seed line that they can so they can stay away from some of the superpowers in that division for as long as possible. I mean, last year, obviously, they weren't as strong as they are this year, but they felt like they could have maybe made a little bit of noise if things would have broke right for them. But the losses in the regular season ended up pairing them with a first-round trip to Lena Winslow. So that's obviously something that they can avoid. If they keep winning football games, they will get a first-round home game against a much weaker opponent than Lena Winslow, and that would be what they're hoping for. So yeah, and then for Westville, it's the same situation. If they can win this, they have a good chance to run the table, get themselves in a good position in 2A, and whichever side of the bracket they end up on. As a 9-0 team, they would probably be at worst a 2 or a 3 seed, and that would be what they would want to be able to do. And yet another bracket that looks like it's going to have a bunch of undefeated teams, so you want to get yourself in the best possible position that you can.
How does being in a locked conference affect, either in a good or a bad way, on average playoff positioning?
Well, it depends on how you schedule individually, but the one thing that is consistent about being in a locked conference is you know exactly how many points you're going to have at the beginning of the season. If you know how many wins you have, you know how many points you're going to have. There's no way that that's going to change. And typically, what happens with a locked conference is you don't have a lot of points. Again, in the grand scheme of things, because most teams schedule a little bit stronger in the non-conference schedule. You don't have any luxury to boost that up. You know exactly what you're going to have as a 9-0 team. You played an 8-win team. You played you're stuck. I mean, so every week that you win, you're going to get 4 points. Every week that you lose, you're going to get 5. And then you just add it up at the end of the season. So if you go 9-0, you're going to get 36 points, and that's not enough to be highly seeded. I mean, to get a decent seed off of playoff points, you need to be 40 or above, and preferably closer to 45. But as a 9-0 team in a locked conference, you're only getting to 36. So you're probably going to be at the bottom of a group. So, yeah, that's one of the things that is definitely a factor in being in a locked conference. Well, moving on to what I think is another pretty interesting game in terms of postseason situation. Moments is hosting Salt Fork this week. And if you look at it on paper, these are 2 teams that are pretty even. But I feel like Moments kind of has to have this win. Either that or they're going to have to beat Bismarck-Henning later in the season. These are their options. They have to get this win, because if they don't, that will drop them to 4 losses and then make Bismarck-Henning a must-win, because like we just talked about, lot conference teams don't get a lot of playoff points. As a 4-win team, you're not going to be a factor there. So Moments has to get to 5. This is pretty pivotal for them, isn't it?
It's a huge one. And being at home, I think that Moments is going to be all right. I mean, anytime you've got a kid like Eric Castile, who's been around for 4 years as your quarterback, you always feel like your team's going to have the composure it needs in a big game like this. This series has had some really good games, a couple one-score games in the last 3-4 years. Moments was on the right side last year by a touchdown. So Salt Fork kind of got rolling a little bit there. They dropped week 1, had a nice little 3-game winning streak where the offense went crazy, put up 40+ in all of them. Got humbled a little bit last week, and Bismarck Henning, who showed that, hey, we might not be the team to beat in this conference, but we're still pretty good last week with the 2-score win. And if you're Moments, like I said, Eric, I mean, he's been having a great season. He's over 1,000 passing yards already. And I think that a kid like Eddie Ferreira, another senior, a kid who was kind of banged up last year, he had over 100 yards and a pair of touchdowns. I think having him be that reliable guy that Eric can look for. Eric's been having to do a lot of running around in the backfield before he, hits receivers or just ends up tucking and running. And I think when he's running around back there, just trying to create something, the fact that he knows he can rely on his guy, Eddie Ferreira, downfield, really kind of helps take this offense to the next level. Eddie will be the first to say he's not quite Brogan Halpin, the all-state receiver that they had last year, in terms of being that reliable guy. But I think him continuing to progress through his senior year is a huge deal. And like you said, Seuss, this one is going to end up just deciding, really, I think, if Moments gets in or not.
All right, Watseka with a little bit of a challenge this week. They bring Bismarck Henning to town. The Warriors, I think, probably just hoping to bounce back a little bit and try to make this a competitive game here in Week 6 after a rough one last week.
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, the Warriors had their best offensive day of the season last year. Their most in well over a calendar year since the third week of 2024. But they also allowed 67. So kind of one step forward, 2 steps back with the Warriors. They're looking to kind of continue evolving still. They had a new quarterback come in this year, and Austin Morris kind of went from running back to quarterback. And, everyone else, aside from Dennis Goodman, the other starting running back from last year who's back in his spot, everyone's kind of had to fit in around that. So like you said, now you got to test with Bismarck Henning. See if they can pass it, man. I really curious to see if that offense can kind of take that next step. They're starting to show some signs. The yardage is increasing kind of every week. Like I said, 20 points, the most that they've scored in a long time. But they know that, if they want to get back in the playoffs, they've pretty much got to win out at 1-4. Like you said, playoff points not going to get you in with 4 wins out of the BBC. So I think that this week they're going to hope they've got 5 really experienced guys up front in their offensive line. They're going to hope that those guys can establish things and that they can kind of dictate the tempo on the ground and do things on their terms. And we'll see if they're able to do that against a Bismarck Henning team that, like I said, last week kind of showed, hey, we're not quite what we were last year, but we're still going to be one of the toughest games on your schedule.
So the last one out of Vermilion Valley games here, we've got Iroquois, Georgetown Ridge Farm coming to Iroquois West. On paper, this looks like this could be somewhat interesting. I mean, you've got a couple of teams here that obviously are, trying to work their way through it, not with the greatest records, but on paper, these two teams look pretty equal. Yeah,
they are pretty equal, and the Raiders, man, they've had their first 2 games. They won one and lost one that were both decided by a point. Have dropped 3 in a row since then, but they knew that they weren't going to be winning a ton of games this year with 2/3 of their roster as underclassmen. So this is kind of that point in the season where those younger kids, they've gained some experience. And now maybe in this game, I don't think is one of them because I think that they've got a pretty good chance and are likely to win this game. But there might be some games down the stretch where like, whoa, how did Iroquois West stay so close to that one? Or how did they win that one? I think this is kind of that turning point in the season for them. Aiden Miller, he found the end zone last week. He's a kid I've talked about on this podcast multiple times. I think as he continues to climb, it's year 3 already for Coach Tim Hamilton. They've been waiting to kind of reap some rewards, and I think that maybe this week as they potentially get another win, they could start kind of seeing some of those rewards being reaped and start to get kind of their vision for things established, I guess you could say.
All right, switching gears now to the Illinois Central 8. Kind of some, I guess, interesting games in this slate just for, the fact of even though we're in week 6 now, some of these teams, I'm not exactly sure where they're at. Like, I mean, in terms of what's going to happen moving forward, it's kind of a jumbled conference. Let's start with the one that I think is probably the closest to being even on paper. Let's go with Piatone and Reed Custer here. I mean, obviously, Piatone has been a consistent playoff qualifier over the past few years. This is pivotal, I think, for them to make sure that they get back to there. And then Reed Custer, which we talked about before, a team that has been playing better than I think a lot of people kind of expected after a rough season last year. Had a rough week of things last week with Coal City. That's something that we can say for a lot of the past opponents of Coal City. But both of these two teams right now, I mean, this could be a pretty pivotal win for them moving forward in terms of getting them to where they would like to go. How do you see this one shaping up?
I'm very curious to see how it shapes out. I'm kind of like you, where I mean, Piatone sitting at 3-2, Reed Custer 2-3. Obviously, that tells you off the bat this is going to be a pretty close one. And in your preview capsule too, you kind of noted so a couple weeks ago we saw Piatone and Coach Tolley get a little out of character and go spread pass heavy. Last week they went back to how they butter their bread. Went back to that ground and pound game, ran for over 300 yards against Streeter, and what we're used to seeing Piatone football do. And so now if you read Custer and you're trying to game plan, you've seen the Blue Devils have put kind of a lot on tape this year. And that kind of might get into your head as a coach, like, all right, what do we really need to prepare for? What are they going to do this week against us? And if you're on the flip side of things, the Comets have shown that their ground and pound game, they're of their own. They've got speed with it. They've got, some power with it. They can hit you in a bunch of different ways with how they come at you with their ground game, depending on personnel. I think whether it's just deciding who's going to win, whether it's how this game's going to look in terms of what kind of styles of offense we're going to see, a lot of mystery and a lot of intrigue around this game. I think a real sneaky good game on this slate this week.
Coal City traveling to Manteno. Coal City has, to me, been flying under the radar a little bit. After that loss to Richmond Burton, I feel like some of the heat off the Kohlers has kind of gone off a little bit, at least as far from a statewide perspective. I think that's a big mistake. I think this team is playing really, really good football right now. And I don't know if Richmond Burton's getting enough credit for being as good as they are. So that's the combination of those two things. It's like you looked at Coal City kind of has fallen out of the state rankings a little bit. And, I'm not sure that's an accurate reflection of where they're at. And Manteno's just right now, I don't know what to expect from Manteno, to be honest with you. On a week-to-week basis, I'm not sure what I'm going to get. Kind of a wild card for me, but it will be a challenge for Manteno to kind of slow down this powerhouse that Coal City seems to be demonstrating themselves as.
Yeah, this will be the game that I'm at this week, actually up in Manteno. The Kohlers, I been saying since the beginning of the year that, look, their passing game is going to be really tough this year. It has been. Connor Henline's been great, but kind of like Piatone, they went back to the old-fashioned football we know them for traditionally. Went back to the ground, leaned on Logan Natashuk, who's a huge part of that passing game as well. But he went over 100 yards, had a couple touchdowns in that win against Coal City. Against Reed Custer, excuse me. Kohlers have been rolling, like you said, and I'm with you. Richmond Burton, man, they need to start getting a lot more love than they're getting, especially the fact that they're a Class 3A team now instead of 4A. That's a real dangerous team once we get to the postseason. But on the other side with Mantino, Wilmington's always going to be that measuring stick. That's who they had last week, and they saw that they're kind of falling short. And that stick, I know Coach Haynes has the boys back at it this week. 2 years in a row now that the schedule has not been kind to them in terms of putting Wilmington and Coal City back to back with one another. So this for the Panthers too, is they sit at 3-2, and they're the game that they picked up instead of taking the forfeit win against Lyle. With Lyle not having a season this year, they went out and challenged themselves with Gibson City, Melvin Sibley, a really good Class 1A program, and that's not going to be a guaranteed win like they could have had. So this is kind of got some importance for the Panthers in terms of playoffs, in terms of, having some comfort and a little bit of breathing room. So yeah, I'm kind of with you. I'm curious what to expect. Not really sure what to expect, but I think after the way that the Kohlers dominated this one last year and the way that the Panthers got dominated by Wilmington last week, some people may say, well, then they'll probably get dominated this week. I'm kind of the opposite, though. Knowing Coach Haynes, Coach Kurt Belial, a lot of the guys on that staff, that's got them hungry and wanting to get back in the lab and get things working. So really curious to see what kind of game we're going to get out of those two on Friday.
Herscher coming off the quote-unquote bye week, improving them to 3-2. Traveling to Streeter this week. A super important game for Herscher in terms of their playoff hopes. It's one of those situations where I feel like Herscher has kind of maybe turned the page where we can start talking about them in that capacity. I don't want to say that this is a trap game, but this is the kind of game in the past that Herscher would go into and really need, and then they wouldn't get it. So for them, I think this is all about maintaining momentum. Coming off that bye week, making sure that you're not rusty and just demonstrating that you are that caliber of a football team, I think is really pivotal for Herscher, and not let Streeter, have the opportunity to stay in that game. I think it's really important for them to come out and quickly in that game and get themselves going off on the right foot, not let Streeter think, hey, we've got a chance to pull, what would be classified as an upset here. I think that's key for Herscher, don't you? Well, it looks like we have a technical issue that broached up there with Mason's connection. So once again, we'll wrap up real quick here. I'll just close in on the other game here in the Illinois Central 8. Wilmington playing a non-conference game against Thornton, a situation that arose out of Lyle once again forfeiting their season. So a non-conference game here for Wilmington. Although Thornton is a larger school, a Class 7A, Class 8A type of school, they are a struggling program. It will give Wilmington to see a little bit different style of opponent, but it should be a really good game for Wilmington to tack on another victory, lock in that playoff eligibility, and move to 5-1, in my opinion. But that wraps up the 11-man football around here. Both the 8-man football teams in the area, St. Anne and MCP, took losses in Week 5, so they've both fallen from the ranks of the undefeated. But still setting up an opportunity for those two teams to meet later on with pretty good records on the line and probably playoff positioning for those two schools. So that'll wrap up the Kankakee County area football podcast for this week. For Mason Schweizer, I'm Steve Soucie, and we'll catch you next week.